Okay, on the last segment, I talked about establishing grade, and I wasn't real clear about how I leave that for my excavator, but I've got an illustration drawn here on the board. I usually drive a 2x4 stake. This would represent the existing ground level. I shoot around and get the elevations throughout the property and to establish the finished grade. I get this to a point where that I will have a 6-inch slope away from the house so that the water will drain away. I will figure where the top of my foundation wall will be, and I put it on the stake. I also show my finish grade, what my finish grade will be when the excavator backfills my foundation. And then I'll put a cut line. All this is written on the stake so that the excavator can understand it. And you've got to remember that from your finished grade, you have to be below your frost line. So that's the reason I leave this number here to bottom of footer. That way the excavator knows exactly how deep to dig, and he digs a level hole for the footer to go into. I would like to talk now somewhat about laying out the lines where to build. Usually, if you have drawings from an engineer, he will locate on the drawings exactly where you should put the house. Now, for the last 5 houses, we have skipped the engineer, and I've been responsible for placing the house on the lot. Talking about the habitat houses I'm working with at this time. And generally in our area, the cities that I've worked in, to pass the zoning, you have to be 25 feet away from the sidewalk, and you have to be at least 5 foot away from the property line on the sides, but the total of both sides has to be 15 feet. And that's to locate your structure. Okay? And usually these lots are about 85 feet on the width, and they're usually about 150 feet on the depth. These are the ones I'm working with currently. I think it's a good illustration. I have worked on projects where the numbers were a lot bigger. I helped a engineer lay out for a chemical plant that was probably a mile long and probably a half a mile wide. And we had to go in and lay out a depressed track area with slope stakes to show where the top of the slope went. We had to show where the line of the bottom of the depressed area went, where the railroad tracks fit into that depressed area with elevations and lines for the excavator to use. We also had to slope a field so that the water would drain a certain way, which was really interesting. That was about 45 years ago that I worked on that project. I also worked with a surveyor. A friend of mine had a 40-acre piece of ground that he wanted to subdivide, and I told him that I wanted to buy one of the first lots, but he had a surveyor that needed a helper, so I worked with the surveyor. I learned a lot from that surveyor. I've laid out a few pieces of industrial jobs where they were going to construct a new unit in a plant. So here's how we do that. We this is my builder's transit. And if you notice, it's got a plumb bob hung on it. This plumb bob is so that you can set the transit up over a point. So I know that I'm exactly over the point when my plumb bob hangs on that point. I use stakes. This is a stake that I've used already, and you notice it's got orange paint on it. That serves two reasons. One, no one will go into the field and trip over it. Two, it'll be easy for the excavator to see where it is. And it has lines on the top where I've measured from my property line, and I put a nail in there to hook my tape on to establish the building lines. Now, this transit, it's kind of like most other transits. It has leveling screws. This one just has two to adjust. You turn it over one and adjust this screw, and what you've got to remember, whichever way your left thumb goes is the way the bubble goes. So if I want the bubble to go that way, I turn the screw with my thumb this way. Okay, that's level. Then I turn it this way over this screw, and that's level. Now, when we set up over a point, generally we have two datum points. So I will point this transit over. Now notice, you don't hang on this thing. You gently move it with your finger so as not to upset the level. Okay, now the eyepiece, you can turn the eyepiece and it will focus in on this darkens your crosshairs. There's crosshairs inside to read on. This knob on top, it focuses on your target. Okay, we have a table here that's divided into degrees. So once you lock, there's a lock over here on the side of the transit. Let me turn it around here. This is a lock. We turn it and lock it. Okay. Once we're locked onto our point, we zero. Let me turn it loose here. Now I'm locked on my point. I turn my scale. There's the alignments on this side. I turn my scale to 0. Okay, see, now my line is locked, and I have an adjustment right here on the back where I gently move it back and forth if it's just a little bit off, and I get on my point. Now I get my 0 back. Now my scale won't turn. I can turn angles from here. I release the transit, and if I want 90 degrees, generally that's most of the time what we use. I lock it on 90 degrees. From my original point to this point was 90 degrees. Now, if for some reason I'm working as a survey, I also have a vertical scale. I can shoot a point at some degree. I can read my degree here on the side when I shoot my point. And generally when we're doing trigonometric leveling, we use a long tape. I have a 300-foot tape here. This is a cloth tape. I prefer the metal surveyor's chain. This is marked with feet, tenths and hundredths on one side, feet and inches on the other. So I would hold at the pivot point here on my instrument and take a reading where I set the stake on line up the hill somewhere. That way with trigonometry I can figure the level distance, and because the incline distance is much greater than the level distance. but the measurement has to be correct. Okay. I also have a lock here that I can lock when I get on my point. I can lock my vertical as well as my horizontal. Now, once I measure my corners to my structure, whatever it may be, I generally will have a surveyor's peg here, here, and all corners or different breaks in the lines, and I'll have degrees written on here so that I'll know exactly which way to go with that. So generally I'll measure along one line and get my points where the building goes from the sides. I'll measure along the depth and get that corner. I'll take my tapes and I'll measure to here and here to get this corner. I'll drive a stake here and I'll put the nail where I have these points. Then from this stake here, there's stakes in all these points here. I've established this line here, and I will set up on here and shoot a point here. That'll be my main setup. I'll shoot this point here with the tape. I'll sight it with the crosshairs, and I'll also measure with my tape. And I'll do that same thing here and here. Then I'll simply measure from here to here and from here to here. And I'll make sure that all my stakes are level. Now, I've got some other tools here. Once I get my layout of my house, I'll use this to make a line with, and I'll spray for my excavator. Within the bounds of the house, if I'm by myself, I'll generally use my water level. I can do this by myself with no help. Once I get into the structure, I generally use 100-foot tapes. I'll measure my distance here and here, and I will figure what the diagonal is. We use the Pythagorean theorem, a square plus b square equals c square. So I know what this is supposed to be. I know what this is supposed to be. I do the math and I come up with this one. So I will hold on this point to here and from this point to there, and that will lay me in square. Then all I have to do is measure from here to here and here to here, and I'll recheck my diagonal this way. If this and this, if these two lines are equal, these two lines are equal, then these two diagonals should be equal, and you should be able to work it out to the 16th, which is close enough. So now I'm ready for my excavator to come in and dig my hole for my foundation. So that's what I wanted to discuss today, is how to lay out your lines, how to use the transit. I didn't mention that there is a vernier scale on this that I can shoot within a half a degree, which is really close. I generally have a magnifying glass that I can zero in and see exactly when I'm in line. Now, I know this was quick. There's a lot more to the layout than what I've shown. And if you are interested, you need to study this out, and it will probably, if you're starting out, it'll probably be a long while before you're able to do that layout. Thank you.